Continuing where I left off, Chapter 10. Shortly after his admission into the Masonic Brotherhood, Pierre went to the province of Kiev, where he had the greatest number of serfs, taking with him full directions, which he had set down for his own guidance, as to what he should do on his estates. On reaching Kiev, Pierre sent to his counter house for all his stewards and explained to him his intention and wishes. He told them that steps would be taken without delay to liberate his serfs, and that meanwhile they were not to be overburdened with labor, that women with children were not to be sent to work, that assistance was to be given to the peasants, that punishments were to be the admonitory rather than corporal, and that hospitals, schools, and asylums were to be established on all the estates. Some of the stewards, there were some similar illiterate foremen among them, listened in dismay, supposing the meaning of this speech to be that the young count was displeased with their management and with their embezzlement of his money. Others, after their first fright, were amused by Pierre's lips and the new words they had not heard before. Others simply enjoyed hearing how the master talked, while a fourth and more intelligent group, which included the head steward, gathered from the speech and how they would have to deal with the master to attain their own ends. The head steward expressed great sympathy with Pierre's projects. He remarked, however, that apart from these innovations, it would be necessary to go into the general state of affairs, as things were in a bad way. Despite Count Besikoff's enormous wealth, since inheriting it and coming into an income that was said to amount to 500,000 rubles a year, Pierre felt himself far less rich than when he had received an allowance of 10,000 a year from his father. He had a vague notion of the following budget in rough outline. About 80,000 went into payments on all the estates to the consul's loan bank. About 30,000 went for the upkeep of his estate near Moscow, the townhouse, and the allowance to the three princesses. About 15,000 was given in pensions, and the same amount to charitable institutions. The countess received 150,000 for her maintenance. Some 70,000 went for interest on debts. The building of a church he had begun a couple of years before cost him 10,000 a year, and he did not know how the rest, about 100,000 rubles, was spent, and almost every year he was obliged to borrow. Moreover, the head steward wrote every year to inform him of fires, bad harvests, or of the necessity of rebuilding factories and workshops, and so the first task confronting Pierre was one for which he had very little aptitude or inclination, practical business. Every day Pierre went into things with his head steward, but he felt that this did not forward matters in the least. He felt that what he was doing was somehow unrelated to the business in hand and did not mesh with it or advance it. On the one hand, the chief steward presented matters in their worst light, pointing out to Pierre the absolute necessity of paying off his debts and undertaking new activities with serfs, paying off his debts and undertaking new activities with serfs' laborers, to which Pierre did not agree. On the other hand, Pierre demanded that they should proceed with the liberation of the serfs, which the steward countered by demonstrating the necessity of first paying off the loans from the loan bank, and the consequent impossibility of a speedy emancipation. The steward did not say that it was absolutely impossible. He proposed selling the forest and province of Kostroma, the land down the river, and the Crimean state, as a means of making it feasible. But all of these operations, according to him, entailed such complicated processes: the removal of distraints, obtaining authorizations, permits, and so on, that Pierre became bewildered and could only say, "Yes, yes, do that." Pierre lacked that practical perseverance that would have enabled him promptly to undertake the business himself. And so he disliked it, and merely tried to pretend to the steward that he was attending to it. The steward, for his part, tried to pretend to the count that he considered their consolations of great value to the master, and a great inconvenience to himself. Pierre found people he knew in the large city of Kiev. Others hastened to make his acquaintance, and gave a warm welcome to the rich newcomer, the largest landowner in the province. Temptations to his besetting weakness, the one to which he confessed at his initiation into the lodge, were so strong that Pierre could not resist them. Again, whole days, weeks, months of his life were busily filled with parties, dinners, lunches, and balls, giving him as little time for reflection as in Petersburg. Instead of the new life which he had hoped to lead, he was still living the old one, only in different surroundings. Of the 3 precepts of Freemasonry, Pierre realized that he did not fulfill the one enjoining every Mason to make his life a model of rectitude, and that of the 7 virtues. He lacked 2, morality and the love of death. He consoled himself with the thought that, on the other hand, he was fulfilling another of the precepts, the improvement of the human race, and possessed other virtues, love for his neighbor, and above all, generosity. In the spring of 1807, Pierre decided to return to Petersburg. On the way, he intended to visit all his estates and see for himself to what extent his orders had been carried out, and how the serfs whom God had entrusted to his care and whom he was striving to benefit were now faring. The chief steward, who considered the young count's enterprises almost insane, unprofitable for himself, the count and the peasants, had made some concessions, while continuing to represent the liberation of the serfs as impracticable, he gave orders for the erection of large buildings, schools, hospitals, and asylums on all the estates. Everywhere preparations were made for the master to be met, not with ostentatious festivities, which he knew Pierre would not like, but with pious ceremonies of thanksgiving, with icons and the bread and salt of hospitality, which would, according to his understanding of his master, be more likely to touch and delude him. The southern spring, the comfortable speedy journey in a Viennese carriage, and the solitude of the road all had a gladdening effect on Pierre. The estates he had not visited before were each more picturesque than the other. Everywhere the peasantry appeared to be thriving and touching grateful for the benefits he had conferred on them. And everywhere his reception was such that, though it embarrassed Pierre, it was a roused feeling of joy in the depths of his soul. In one place the peasants presented him with bread and salt, and an icon of St. Peter and St. Paul, begging permission, as a token of their love and gratitude for all that had been done for them, to build at their own expense a new chantry to the church in honor of his patron saints Peter and Paul. In another place he was met by a woman with infants in arms, who thanked him for releasing them from hard labor. On a third estate the priest, bearing a cross, came to meet him surrounded by children, whom, through the beneficence of the count, he was entrusting in reading and writing and religion. On all his estates Pierre saw with his own eyes brick buildings erected or in the course of erection, all to the same plan, for hospitals, schools, and almshouses, which were soon to be opened. Everywhere he saw the steward's accounts indicating that the corvée had been reduced, and heard the touching thanks of deputations of peasants in their blue caftans. What Pierre did not know was that the place where they presented him with bread and salt and wanted to build a chantry in honor of St. Peter and St. Paul was a market village in which a fair was always held on St. Peter's Day. That the well-to-do peasants, the ones who formed the deputation, had begun the chantry long before, and that 9/10 of the peasants of the villages lived in a state of destitution. He did not know that since by his orders nursing mothers were no longer sent to work on his land, did they even harder work on their own plots of ground. He did not know that the priest who met him with the cross oppressed the peasants with his exactions, and that the pupils gathered around him and had been yielded up to him with tears and redeemed them with large sum of money by their parents. He did not know that the brick buildings being raised according to plan were built by serfs whose conveyor would thus increase, having been reduced only on paper. He did not know that the steward had pointed out to him in the account books that the serfs' quittance had been reduced by a third, their corvée had been increased by half. And so Pierre, entranced with his visit to his estates, quite recovered the philanthropic mood in which he left Petersburg, and wrote enthusiastic letters to his brother preceptor, as he called the Grand Master. How easy it is, how little effort is required to do so much good, thought Pierre, and how little we trouble ourselves to do it. He was pleased by the gratitude shown him, but abashed at receiving it. This gratitude suggested to him how much more he might do for these simple, good-natured people. The chief steward, a thoroughly stupid yet cunning man, actually took the measure of the intelligent but naive count, and played with him as with a toy. Having seen the effect these prearranged receptions had on Pierre, he advanced even more compelling proofs of the impossibility and, above all, the futility of freeing the serfs who were quite happy as they were. In his secret soul, Pierre agreed with the steward that it would be hard to imagine happier people, and that God only knew what would become of them if they were free. However, he insisted, though reluctantly, on what he thought was right. The steward promised to do all in his power to carry out the count's wishes, clearly perceiving that not only would the count never be in position to verify whether every measure had been taken for the sale of the land and forest and the redemption of the mortgages at the loan bank, but he would probably never even inquire and would never find out that the newly erected buildings were standing empty, and that the serfs continued to give money and labor just what other people's serfs gave. That is to say, all that could be got out of them. Chapter 11. Returning from his southern journey in the happiest frame of mind, Pierre carried out an intention he had long had of visiting his friend Bukowski, whom he had not seen for 2 years. At the last station, learning that Prince Andrei was not at Bald Hills, but at his own recently acquired estate, Pierre set out to find him there. Boguchararo laid in a flat, unprepossessing region among fields and forest of fir and birch, part of which had been cut down. The homestead was at one end of the village, which stretched straight along the main road. It stood in the midst of a young copse, with several large pines among the small trees, and in front was an overflowing pond, newly dug, its banks still devoid of grass. The homestead consisted of a threshing floor, outbuildings, stables, a bathhouse, a lodge, and a large brick house with a semicircular facade, still in the course of construction. Around the house was a newly laid out garden. The fences and gates were solid and new. Under a shed stood 2 fire pumps and a water barrel painted green. The roads were straight, the bridges sturdy and equipped with handrails. Everything bore the stamp of efficiency and care. In reply to Pierre's inquiry as to where the prince lived, some domestic serfs he met on the way pointed out a small, newly built lodge at the very edge of the pond, Anton, an old servant who had looked after Pierre-Andre in his boyhood, helped Pierre out of his carriage, told him that the prince was at home, and showed him into an immaculate little anteroom. Pierre was struck by the modesty of this small, though scrupulously clean house, after the resplendent surroundings in which he had last seen his friend in Petersburg. He quickly entered the little parlor, still unplastered and smelling of pine wood, and would have gone farther, but Anton ran ahead on tiptoe and knocked at a door. "Well, what is it?" came a sharp, unpleasant voice. "A visitor? Ask him to wait." And there was the sound of a chair being pushed back. Pierre went to the door with rapid steps and came face to face with Prince Andre, who came out frowning and looking older. Pierre embraced him and, lifting his spectacles, kissed his friend on the cheek and looked at him intently. "Well, I didn't expect you. I am glad," said Prince Andre. Pierre said nothing. He could not take his eyes off his friend and continued to look at him in amazement. He was struck by the change in him. His words were cordial, his face wore a smile, but his eyes, despite his apparent wish to bring a gleam of pleasure and joy to them, were dull and lifeless. It was not only that his friend had grown thinner, paler, more mature, but what shocked and alienated Pierre, till he got used to it, was that look in his eyes and the furrow on his brow that bore witness to prolonged concentration on some one thought. As is usually the case when friends meet after a long separation, it took some time for the conversation to fix on anything. They asked each other questions and gave brief replies to things they knew ought to be talked over at length. At last, the conversation settled on some of the topics previously touched on only in passing, and they discussed things that had happened in the past, their plans for the future, Pierre's journey and recent activities, the war, and so on. The preoccupation and despair that Pierre had remarked in Prince Andre's eyes was still more noticeable in the smile with which he now listened to him, and especially when he spoke with joyful animation of the past or of the future. It was as if Prince Andre would have liked to take an interest in what Pierre was saying, but could not. Pierre began to feel that it was somehow unseemly to speak of his enthusiasms, dreams, hopes of happiness in Prince Andre's presence. He felt ashamed of expressing all his new Masonic ideas, which had been revived and greatly strengthened by his recent journey. He restrained himself, fearing to seem naive. At the same time, he felt an irresistible desire to show his friend as soon as possible that he was now a quite different and better person than he had been in Petersburg. "I can't tell you how much I've lived through since then. I hardly know myself. Yes, we have greatly changed since those days," said Prince Andre. "Well, and you?" asked Pierre. "What are your plans?" "Plans?" echoed Prince Andre ironically. "My plans?" he repeated, as if wondering at the word. "Why, as you see, I'm building. I mean to settle here all together next year." Pierre was silent and looked searchingly into Prince Andre's face, which had grown so much older. "No, I meant to ask," Pierre began, but Prince Andre interrupted him. "But why talk of me? You must tell me. Tell me about your journey, about all you have been doing on your estates." Pierre began to describe what had been done on his estates, trying as far as possible to conceal his own part in the improvements that had been made. Prince Andre several times prompted him, as though all that Pierre had done was an old familiar story, and he listened not only without interest, but even as if he blushed for what Pierre was telling him. Pierre began to feel awkward and even depressed in his friend's company. He fell silent. "I'll tell you what, my dear fellow," said Prince Andrei, who apparently also felt constrained and depressed with his visitor. "I'm only camping here. I just came to have a look at things. I'm going back to my sister today. I'll introduce you to her. But of course, you know her already," he said, obviously trying to entertain a guest with whom he now found nothing in common. "We'll go after dinner. And now, would you care to see my place?" They went out and walked about till dinner time, talking of the political news and common acquaintances, like people who are not very intimate. Prince Andrei spoke with a certain interest and animation only on the subject of the new homestead and the building he had undertaken. But even then, while on the scaffolding, he suddenly broke off in the middle of describing the plan of the house. "However, this is not particularly interesting. Let us go and have dinner, and then we'll set off." At dinner, the subject of Pierre's marriage came up. "I was very much surprised when I heard about it," said Prince Andrei. Pierre blushed, as he has always did at any mention of this subject, and he said hurriedly, "I'll tell you sometime how it all happened, but you know it's all over and forever." "Forever?" said Prince Andrei. "Nothing is forever." "But you know how it ended, don't you? You heard about the duel, and so you had to go through that too." "One thing I thank God for is that I didn't kill that man." "Why?" asked Prince Andrei. "To kill a vicious dog is a very good thing, really." "No, to kill a man is a bad, wrong." "Why is it wrong?" insisted Prince Andrei. "It is not given to man to judge what is right and wrong. Men always did and always will err, and in nothing more than in what they regard as right and wrong. What does harm to another is wrong," said Pierre, pleased to see that for the first time since his arrival Prince Andrei was roused, had begun to talk, and seemed ready to speak of what it was that had brought him to his present state. "And who has told you what is bad for another man?" he asked. "Bad? Bad?" repeated Pierre. "We all know what is bad for ourselves." "Yes, we know that. But what I know is harmful for myself is not the harm I can inflict on another," said Prince Andrei, growing more and more animated, and apparently eager to express his new outlook to Pierre. He began to speak in French. "I know only two real misfortunes in life, remorse and sickness. The only good is the absence of these evils. To live for myself, avoiding these two evils, is my whole philosophy now." "And love for one neighbor, and self-sacrifice," began Pierre. "No, I cannot agree with you. To live solely to avoid doing evil, so as not to repent, is not enough. I live like that. I live for myself, and it ruined my life. And only now, when I'm living for others, or at least trying to," modesty compelled Pierre to correct himself, "only now do I realize all the happiness life holds. No, I don't agree with you, and you yourself do not really believe what you are saying." Prince Andrei was silent, and looked at Pierre with an ironical smile. "When you see my sister Maria, you'll get on with her," he said. "Perhaps you are right for yourself," he continued, after a brief pause. "But everyone lives in his own way. You live for yourself, and you say nearly ruined your life, and found happiness only when you began to live for others. But my experience has been exactly the reverse. I live for glory, and, after all, what is glory but the same love for others, a desire to do something for them, a desire for their approval? So I live for others, and not almost, but entirely ruined my life. And only since I started living for myself have I been at peace." "But what do you mean when you say you live only for yourself?" asked Pierre, growing excited. "What of your son, your sister, your father?" "But that's the same as myself. They are not others," said Prince Andrei. "But others? one's neighbor. Le prochain, as you and Princess Maya express it, are the chief source of error and evil. One's neighbor, that's like those Kev peasants of yours to whom you want to do good. And he gave Pierre a mocking, challenging look. He clearly meant to provoke him. You are not serious, replied Pierre, growing more and more vehement. What error or evil can there be in my wishing to do good, though I did very little and did it very badly? Still, I wanted to do good and accomplish a little something. What possible harm can there be if unfortunate people, our serfs, people just like ourselves, were growing up and dying with no idea of God and truth beyond ceremonies and meaningless prayers, and are now instructed in the comforting belief in a future life, retribution, recompense, and consolation? What evil and error can there be if people were dying of disease without any help, when material assistance could so easily be rendered? And I supplied them with a doctor, a hospital, an asylum for the aged. And is it not a palpable, incontestable good if a peasant or a woman with an infant have no respite day or night, and I give them rest and leisure? Asked Pierre, speaking hurriedly and lip-singing. And that is what I have done, though badly and to a very small extent. But I have made a start, and you cannot persuade me that it was not good. And more than that, you cannot persuade me that you do not think so yourself. And the great thing is, he continued, that I know, and know for certain, that the pleasure of doing this good is the only real happiness in life. Oh, if you put it like that, it's quite a different matter, said Prince Andrei. I build a house and lay out a garden, and you build hospitals. Either occupation may serve to pass the time, but as to what is right, what is good, you must leave that to him, who knows all things. It is not for us to judge. Well, you want an argument, he added? Come on, then. They left the table and sat in the entrance porch, which served as a veranda. Come, let's argue the matter, said Prince Andrei. You talk of schools, he went on, bending down one finger, instruction and so forth. That is, you want to raise him. He pointed to a peasant who passed by then, taking off his cap, from his animal condition, and endow him with moral needs. It seems to me that the animal happiness is the only happiness possible, and that is just what you want to deprive him of. I envy him, but you want to make him what I am, without providing him with my intelligence, my feelings, or my means. Another thing, you want to lighten his toll, but as I see it, physical labor is an essential to him, as much as condition of his existence as mental activities to you and me. You can't help thinking. I go to bed after 2 a.m. Thoughts come to my mind. I can't sleep and toss about till dawn because I think and can't help thinking, just as he can't help plowing and mowing. If he didn't, he would go to the tavern or fall ill, just as I could not stand in his terrible physical labor, but should die within a week. So he could not stand my physical inactivity, but would grow fat and die. The third thing, Prince Andrei bent down a third finger. What else was it you said? Oh yes, hospitals, medicine. Our peasant has a stroke. He's dying. You have him bled, and he recovers. But he's a cripple. He'll drag about for 10 years, a burden to everyone. It would have been far easier and simpler for him to die. Others are being born. There are plenty of them as it is. It would be different if you grudged losing a laborer, which is how I regard him. But you want to cure him out of love for him, and he doesn't want that. And besides, what an idea! That medicine ever cured anyone? Killed them, yes, he said, frowning sardonically and turning away from Pierre. Prince Andrei expressed his thoughts so clearly and precisely that it was evident that he reflected on this subject more than once. He spoke readily and rapidly, like a man who has not talked for a long time. The more hopeless his views, the more animated he looked. "Oh, that is awful, awful!" exclaimed Pierre. "I don't understand how you can live with such ideas." "I have had such moments myself, It was not so long ago, in Moscow, and again on my journey. But then I sink to such depths that I am not really living. Everything is abhorrent to me, myself most of all. Then I don't eat, don't wash. And how is it with you? Not wash? Why? That's unclean, said Prince Andrei. On the contrary, one must try to make one's life as pleasant as possible. I'm alive, and it's no fault of mine. However, I must live out my life as best as I can, without disturbing others. But what motive have you for living? With such ideas, one would just sit and do nothing, never embark on anything. Life won't leave one in peace, even so. I should be glad to do nothing. But here, on the one hand, the local nobility had done me the honor of electing me their marshal. It was all I could do to get out of it. They could not understand that I lacked the necessary qualifications, a certain good nature, bustling vulgarity that is required for the position. Then there's this house, which had to be built so I could have a home of my own, where I could be at peace. And now there's the militia. Why aren't you serving in the army? After Austerlitz, said Prince Andrei somberly. No, thank you. I vow never again to go on active service in the Russian army. And I won't. Not if Bonaparte were right here at Smolensk threatening Bald Hills. Even then I wouldn't serve in the Russian army. Well, as I was saying, he continued, recovering his composure, now there's the militia. My father is commander-in-chief of the 3rd District, and the only way for me to avoid active service is to serve under him. So you are in the service after all? Yes, he replied and fell silent. But why? I'll tell you why. My father is one of the most remarkable men of his time, but he's growing old, and though he is not exactly cruel, he has too vigorous a nature. He is so accustomed to unlimited power that he is terrible, and now the emperor has given him further power as chief of the militia. If I had arrived 2 hours late, a fortnight ago, he would have had the register clerk at Yukhonovo hanged, said Prince Andrei with a smile. So I'm serving because I alone have an influence over my father, and now and then I am able to save him from committing an act that would torment him afterward. Ah, there you see. Yes, but it's not as you imagine, Prince Andrei continued. It was not that I felt or feel now the least sympathy for that scoundrelly Kirk, who has been stealing boots or something from the recruits, but I was sorry for my father, which again means for myself. Prince Andrei grew more and more animated. His eyes glittered feverishly as he tried to prove to Pierre that in his actions there was never any desire to do good to his neighbor. Look here. You want to liberate your serfs, he went on, and that's a very good thing, but not for you. I'm sure you have never had anyone flogged or sent to Siberia, and still less for your peasants. If they are beaten, flogged, or sent to Siberia, I don't suppose they are any the worse for it. In Siberia, they can lead the same brutish life. The stripes on the body heal, and they are just as happy as before. The men it would be good for are those morally ravaged self-owners who bring remorse upon themselves, stifle that remorse, and grow callous as a result of being able to inflict punishment, justly and unjustly. It is those people I pity, and for their sakes I should like to see the serfs liberated. You may not have come across it, but I have seen how good men brought up in these traditions of unlimited power, in time as they grow more irascible, become cruel and obdurate, and though they are aware of it, are unable to restrain themselves, and grow more and more miserable. Prince Andrei spoke with such passion that Pierre could not help thinking that these ideas were engendered by his father's case. He made no reply. So you see, that is who and what I am sorry for. Human dignity, peace of mind, purity, and not backs and heads, which, however you beat and shave them, remain the same, back and heads. No, 1,000 times no, I should never agree with you, said Pierre. And I'm going to leave it off there. Thank you so much for watching. If you like it, please give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Leave a comment below, subscribe, or do nothing. And thank you. In the last video, someone left a comment. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I responded. And the question was, why do I read this and put myself on video? I do it because I enjoy it. I enjoy it very much. And I also want to practice my English as much as possible. And so it was I believe the YouTube user For If Dreams Die. Thank you so much for your question, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.